Why have you not met with them? You said you haven't met with them. Have you met with them? I'll give you one more chance.
My job as the FBI director is to
Is the
invite all
answer yes or
investigative
no
leads.
to whether or not you met with these women who were sexually abused and raped?
The files were overwhelming. 300 gigabytes of evidence, physical material, and video recordings containing information so sensitive that once Donald Trump's name appeared throughout, the entire release process came to a halt. Representative Pramila Jayapal sat in the hearing room holding a July memo she believed exposed a deliberate cover-up within the FBI and the Department of Justice. What followed would uncover just how far the Trump administration went to shield the former president from the Epstein scandal. UN Attorney General Pam Bondi released a single video and declared there was nothing more to see, Jayapal began, her tone cutting through the formal silence of the hearing. Your July memo states that over 300 gigabytes of data and evidence were uncovered, yet you concluded that no further disclosure was appropriate or necessary. That's your own quote. The contradiction was clear and undeniable. The FBI had discovered a vast trove of Epstein evidence, 300 gigabytes worth, yet decided the American public didn't need to see it. After releasing one video to create the illusion of transparency, the Bureau had shut down one of the most consequential investigations of recent times. But Jayapal wasn't finished. She had traced the connection between the evidence discovery and the sudden halt in disclosures, uncovering what she believed to be direct interference from the Trump administration. I think what happened, Mr. Patel, she continued, is that once you realized Donald Trump's name appeared repeatedly in those files, a massive cover-up began. The accusation hung heavy in the air. A sitting Congresswoman had just accused the FBI director of orchestrating a cover-up to protect Trump from the Epstein investigation. The phrase, giant cover-up, echoed through the room, defining exactly what Jayapal believed had occurred once Trump's connections to Epstein became evident. Patel shifted uneasily in his chair. Jayapal pressed on. She had spent months studying the timeline, tracking when the evidence was discovered and when disclosures suddenly stopped. Her preparation made evasion difficult. You are under oath, Mr. Patel, she reminded him. You just told Congressman Swalwell that you never discussed the Epstein files with the president. To your knowledge, did Attorney General Pam Bondi ever speak with him about those files? The question was deliberate, built on facts Jayapal had verified. She already knew about private discussions between Bondi and Trump. She knew what had been said about the Epstein materials, and she was prepared to expose that coordination. Patel hesitated. I can't speak for Attorney General Bondi, he replied. Jayapal refused to let him deflect. So, to your knowledge, you have no information. I'm asking whether you know. Do you have any knowledge? I can't speak, Patel repeated. You're refusing to answer, Jayapal stated flatly. The pattern was obvious. Patel was using the classic bureaucratic defense, claiming he couldn't speak for others to avoid confirming any connection between the Justice Department and the White House. But Jayapal had anticipated this. Let me remind you, she said. The Wall Street Journal reported that in May, Bondi informed Trump he was mentioned in the Epstein files, and in that same meeting, she told him the DOJ would not release those files. The revelation was explosive. According to the Wall Street Journal, there had been direct communication between the Attorney General and the former president about his appearance in the files, followed by a decision to withhold them from public view. The sequence suggested coordination, and the coordination suggested a cover-up. If the reporting was accurate, the highest levels of the Justice Department had briefed Trump on his exposure in the Epstein investigation, then made disclosure decisions based on that knowledge. It was the kind of political interference the department was meant to prevent. But Jayapal wasn't relying solely on media reports. She had also investigated the human cost of this alleged cover-up, uncovering details that turned the scandal from political to personal. Yesterday, you told Senator Kennedy there was, quote, no credible information that Epstein trafficked girls to anyone else, and that you had, quote, continuously asked the public to come forward with information, she said. In response to Congressman Massey, you implied the survivors were not credible. These are survivors. The pivot to victims was powerful. Jayapal wasn't just discussing bureaucracy, she was speaking for women who had endured abuse and were being dismissed by the very agency charged with protecting them. Patel interrupted. "That's not what I said." Jayapal pressed forward. "Fine. I'll ask you again in a moment. But first, let's talk about the survivors. These women came to Capitol Hill to testify that they were groomed and raped at ages 14 and 16. They asked to meet with the president, the FBI, and others who could investigate. Some had never testified before. The reality was now unavoidable. These weren't political abstractions. They were real women whose abuse was being ignored by institutions claiming to seek truth. "If you are genuinely interested in the public providing information," Jayapal continued, "why haven't you met with them? You said you haven't met them. Have you met them? I'll give you one more chance." The question was simple and damning. If Patel truly wanted to gather evidence, why had he avoided meeting those who already had it? Why request more information while ignoring what existed? Patel's defensiveness was obvious. "My job as FBI director," he began, "is to respond yes or no to whether I met with these women." But instead of answering, he launched into a deflection. "Any insinuation that I'm not pursuing child predators and traffickers, look at the stats," he snapped. "And you talk about cover-ups. Where were you during the Obama and Biden administrations when those happened?" His reply revealed three things. He dodged the question, turned accountability into partisan blame, and reframed oversight as political attack. Most importantly, he still hadn't answered whether he'd met the victims. The exchange deteriorated as Jayapal demanded answers, and Patel filled time with irrelevant comparisons to previous administrations. But the essential facts were already exposed. The FBI had discovered massive evidence in the Epstein case. Trump's name appeared throughout it, and disclosures stopped soon after. "Mr. Patel," Jayapal pressed, "are the victims of Epstein's trafficking ring credible?" It should have been the simplest question for any law enforcement official. Victims of trafficking deserve to be heard, protected, and believed based on evidence, not dismissed. Patel replied, "Any person with information about ongoing trafficking, I'm asking if they're credible." Jayapal cut in. "Ma'am, I'm commenting on the evidence we have," Patel said, still evading. He couldn't give a direct answer because admitting credibility might raise questions about why those accounts hadn't been investigated, especially when they implicated powerful individuals. The hearing room broke into chaos as Jayapal insisted on an answer, and Patel continued to deflect. Chairman Jordan tried to maintain order, but the damage was already done. "You're not answering the question," Jayapal said. "You just don't like my answer," Patel shot back. "These women are credible. This administration is the only one that's welcomed new information in this case." The claim was hollow. If Patel had truly welcomed new information, why hadn't he met the survivors? If the administration was committed to transparency, why did it halt disclosure after Trump's name surfaced? The contradiction was glaring. Patel was claiming openness while participating in secrecy. "Present new credible information," Patel insisted. "Present new information. Are the victims credible or not? I'll tell you what happened in the last administration." Even then, instead of addressing the survivors' credibility, Patel retreated again into partisan rhetoric. The inability to give a direct answer about whether trafficking survivors were credible revealed just how deeply political influence had corrupted the most basic principles of law enforcement. As Jayapal's time expired and the hearing moved on to other members, the damage was complete. She had laid bare a consistent pattern of obstruction in the Epstein investigation that began once Donald Trump's extensive involvement became evident. Jayapal exposed clear coordination between the Department of Justice and the White House coordination that raised serious questions about political interference in criminal investigations. She demonstrated how trafficking survivors were being dismissed and ignored by the very institutions meant to protect them. The evidence spoke for itself. The FBI had uncovered 300 gigabytes of data in the Epstein case. When Trump's name began appearing throughout the materials, the disclosure process suddenly stopped. Attorney General Pam Bondi had briefed Trump on his presence in those files and soon after declared that no Further disclosures would be appropriate. Survivors who had requested meetings with federal officials were disregarded. The pattern was unmistakable, and it aligned exactly with Jayapal's accusation. A coordinated cover-up designed to shield Donald Trump from the consequences of his connection to Jeffrey Epstein. The hearing would be remembered not only for the specific allegations raised, but for what it revealed about how political loyalty could undermine even the core functions of justice. When protecting a political figure becomes more important than investigating crimes against children, the entire system has failed. Jayapal had done more than expose Patel's evasions. She had uncovered a cover-up that reached the highest levels of government, one that had real consequences for victims who deserved justice. The 300 gigabytes of evidence remained hidden. Trump's name was still embedded throughout the files, and the women who had been abused as children were still waiting for someone in power to take their testimony seriously. The cover-up was real, the evidence documented, and the fallout would persist long after the hearing ended. But the implications of Jayapal's methodical questioning extended far beyond a single congressional session. Within hours, clips from the exchange spread rapidly across social media. Legal analysts, victims advocates, and accountability groups dissected every moment. The 300 gigabytes of undisclosed material Patel had referenced quickly became a symbol of government secrecy and selective transparency. Experts noted that this was among the largest evidence collections in federal law enforcement history to be withheld from public scrutiny. The magnitude was staggering. 300 gigabytes could contain millions of pages, thousands of hours of footage, photographs, and communications. We're talking about evidence that could fill entire rooms if printed, explained a former federal prosecutor experienced in major trafficking cases. For the FBI to gather this much material and then decide none of it should be disclosed raises serious questions about who made that decision and why. The timeline Jayapal had revealed became the focal point of broader investigation. Journalists, investigators, and congressional staff began mapping the precise sequence of events between Trump's name appearing in the files and the sudden halt in disclosure. The correlation was undeniable. Transparency had continued steadily until Trump's involvement became apparent. From that point, everything stopped. The Wall Street Journal reporting cited by Jayapal proved to be just the beginning. Soon, other major outlets launched parallel inquiries, uncovering new details about coordination between Trump administration officials and federal law enforcement. Sources within the Department of Justice began leaking information about meetings, phone calls, and internal decisions that shaped how the Epstein evidence was handled. Congressional investigators on multiple committees began demanding records, communications between Bondi and Trump, memos about disclosure policies, and logs of meetings where the Epstein files were discussed. The paper trail Jayapal had unearthed quickly became the subject of subpoenas and formal investigations. Perhaps most importantly, Jayapal's focus on the survivors brought national attention to women who had long been ignored. Those who had repeatedly requested meetings with FBI officials now found themselves backed by congressional allies and a sympathetic public. Victims' rights organizations that had spent months quietly lobbying for attention suddenly gained a platform. The contrast between Patel's claim that he sought new information and his refusal to meet women who already had it became a rallying cry for frustrated advocates. Representative Jayapal did what the FBI would not, said the director of a leading anti-trafficking organization. She listened to survivors, took their testimony seriously, and demanded accountability from those who dismissed them. For many of the women, Jayapal's questioning marked a turning point. Survivors who had stayed silent for years began speaking publicly, encouraged by the fact that at least someone in power was willing to hear them. Several began cooperating with congressional investigators and advocacy groups. The international consequences were also profound. Law enforcement agencies abroad, many of which had partnered with the FBI on trafficking investigations, began questioning whether their American counterparts were truly committed to following the evidence wherever it led. Because Epstein's network spanned multiple countries, confidence in the U.S. system was essential. Intelligence agencies that had shared sensitive data with the FBI started reevaluating their cooperation, uncertain whether political factors might influence how that intelligence was used. At home, the political fallout was immediate. Republican senators who had backed Patel's nomination were now forced to defend him against allegations of suppressing evidence. Democrats who had opposed his appointment felt vindicated. But beyond partisan lines, the hearing exposed a deeper crisis. If law enforcement agencies could be pressured to halt investigations for political reasons, then the idea that no one is above the law was under threat. The media coverage was relentless. Editorial boards across ideological divides condemned what looked like deliberate obstruction of justice. Even conservative outlets that typically defended the Trump administration struggled to justify what was being reported. Within the legal community, outrage was palpable. Federal prosecutors who had dedicated their careers to pursuing high-profile offenders were appalled by the suggestion that cases could be buried for political convenience. The very integrity of the justice system depends on investigations guided by evidence, not influence. Professional associations, representing federal prosecutors and FBI agents, issued rare public statements voicing alarm over political interference. These normally apolitical organizations broke their silence because they saw the fundamental ethics of their profession being undermined. Behind the headlines, the technical issue Patel had glossed over, management of evidence, was of enormous significance. The 300 gigabytes of data he referenced could include critical materials necessary to prosecute co-conspirators, identify new victims, or pursue related cases. To suppress that evidence for political reasons was not only unethical, it could be illegal. Legal experts began debating whether Patel's decisions constituted obstruction of justice, abuse of authority, or violations of federal disclosure laws. The deliberate concealment of evidence in a major criminal case for political purposes fit precisely the pattern described in federal corruption statutes. The congressional oversight implications were equally important. Jayapal had shown that persistence and preparation could cut through even the most coordinated government defenses. Her questioning became a model for other lawmakers confronting evasive witnesses. The precedent mattered. Effective oversight only exists when legislators are willing to ask uncomfortable questions and insist on real answers. Jayapal demonstrated that even powerful officials could be held accountable when faced with documented facts and determined inquiry. Meanwhile, the human toll of the cover-up continued to grow as more survivors came forward. Each new account reinforced the perception of systemic indifference to victims whose testimonies implicated influential figures. Federal authorities appeared eager to pursue trafficking cases involving low-level offenders, but hesitant when evidence pointed toward the wealthy or politically connected. This selective enforcement contradicted the very foundation of American justice. In the weeks following the hearing, congressional committees uncovered further evidence of coordination between political officials and law enforcement leadership. The 300 gigabytes of material became a central focus, as lawmakers demanded to know what was being hidden and who had ordered it. At long last, the survivors who had been ignored began receiving meetings, this time with congressional staff rather than the FBI. Their accounts would help shape broader investigations into how politics had compromised justice. The cover-up Jayapal exposed eventually led to criminal inquiries, additional hearings, and proposed reforms to prevent similar interference in the future. Yet for the women whose pain had been disregarded, vindication came too late. The damage was already done. The exchange would be remembered as a turning point when congressional oversight confronted institutional corruption, when facts pierced obstruction, and when survivors' voices finally echoed through the halls of power.